welcome to the Break Even podcast. Pleasure to have Pete and Steph Shilton on this podcast today. And just to start off with, I'd like to ask you a question, Pete. You had a 31 career, including 11 clubs. You hold the all-time record for the most number of competitive appearances in world football. Earned 125 caps as a goalkeeper for England, and in goal for one of the most famous footballing moments, Hand of God. We can't let this pass without a little word being said about that, because I'm sure people would be interested in that.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. No, obviously it was a very famous game, and world's greatest player, one of the all-time greats, was playing Maradona. And of course there was, just after half-time, this famous incident when I think Maradona went for a 1-2 and we had the defensive line on the edge of the box, which is what you're supposed to do, and he ran into a well offside position, but unfortunately our own player Stevie Hodge, for whatever reason, hooked the ball back, and all of a sudden I've got to make a decision, and I decided to go for it, and you don't leave your line unless you're going to get the ball, and of course I was above him, just going to punch it, and he knew that, and he just cheated and punched it in there. It was obviously allowed by the referee and linesman, which was an atrocious decision. Where was VAR when that happened? So yeah, it was really the first goal in the game, and it was a sickener really. And people tend to bring it up occasionally.
I'm sure they might.
But he cheated, and that's the only way he could get the ball past me really.
Personally, what I was interested in, and maybe you can't answer totally truthfully on this bit, is when you were running up towards the referee, what did you actually say to the ref?
I didn't really get close enough to the ref really. Most of the other players, I think Terry Butcher and Terry Fennick were protesting to him, but we thought that the linesman had seen it, and he stood there, but then he ran up the pitch, and it was just a ludicrous decision by, you shouldn't have officials that time refereeing that such a big game as that. They were like third world countries,
Right, so moving on. So before we touch on your gambling story, Steph, tell us about how you two met, and more importantly, did you know who this man was?
I didn't have a clue. So we met in a lift. I was at a golf resort, and I was back then an NHS manager and a semi-pro singer, so I was there for a jazz convention. Right. And I was with a load of my friends, and I walked along this corridor and into this tiny lift, and I was pushed right up against a tall gentleman, and I looked up, and obviously it was Peter, but I thought he was part of the jazz event. I'd never been to a football match, wasn't interested in football, so
you thought he was part of the event,
I thought I said to him, are you part of the jazz, are you a jazz man, because obviously I'm a jazz singer, and he said, no, I'm talking about football, and I just went, oh, how dull, and I thought, no, he's definitely part of the jazz quartet that's going to be there tonight.
So after that, Steph, how did you find it coming into the footballing world once you were with Pete for longer? And what was it like then being in the public eye?
I think because I had that semi-pro singer in me, I was used to performance anyway, and being a solo artist. But I did find that quite difficult because I'm a very private person, and so I found that quite difficult. And Pete and I fell in love very, very quickly, and he moved in with me very quickly. Wow. And then I remember Peter was giving Steven Gerrard his 100th cap, and Pete said, you've been invited as well up to Wembley. Oh, now you've got to bear in mind I'd never been to a football match. My first ever football match, I was sitting in the front row of the Royal Box with Pete, and sitting next to the president of Brazil and his wife and Bobby Charlton. So it was
quite an auspicious start into the world of football.
My life completely changed when I walked into that lift.
Peter, obviously we're here because the main thing is, what we do at Break Even is whatever anybody affected by gambling related harm. Can you tell us a bit about your gambling story? How did you get into it, and when do you think it started for you?
I think it's always in your genes, real gamblers, but you can have learned behaviour as well. And my story was that we used to go to Mablethorpe with my parents. We had a caravan there, and I was about 9 or 10. Yeah. My dad ran a greengrocer's shop in Leicester, and he was given about 6 racehorses to bet while he was away. You know, some one of his customers.
Yeah.
You know, and my dad wasn't a big gambler, but I think he liked to bet, and he had a bet on the first one in the local bookie in Mablethorpe, and that won. And I remember the final one, all 5 won leading up to the final one.
Right.
And my dad said, I'm going to put £10 each way. It's about 12 to 1. So my mum says, oh, right, you've had a few good winnings, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went in the arcade with my brother, and we was in there, and all I can remember is my dad being silhouetted at the big front of the arcade with his arms in the air like this, and the horse had won.
Wow.
He'd won a fortune, really, in those days. I mean, you know, that was sort of in the 60s.
Yeah.
And he gave all the money to my mum, but I think the bookie went bust after that. But that moment of jubilation at winning, you know, a lot of people have a big win, say on the Grand National, and think, oh, this is easy, and off you go, and it is a very addictive.
So did you
product.
adopt that early on, that it's an easy way of getting money, because it's all about the euphoria of winning, obviously being inspired.
The excitement as well, you know. I had a love of horse racing, you know. I used to go to racing meetings, and I owned horses through, so that was my main thing. Occasionally I'd go to a casino for a meal type thing, but in those days, you know, it was totally different.
We're talking about the horses, the dogs, that sort of thing.
It was totally different to what it is now. You know, you couldn't, if you could have an account with a bookmaker, but you'd have to phone up on the landline, and you'd get a credit limit, and then you could listen to the race over the phone. You couldn't watch it unless it was on BBC. I think they eventually.
I guess because of who you were you given an extended line of credits which perhaps other people wouldn't have got when it started to develop into a problem, or?
Well, I think they judged you on. I mean, obviously I was earning decent money. I was a well-known, you know, person even in those days. So, I suppose they, in a way, thought, he'll be all right. He can pay for it.
As it grew, Pete, do you think it affected you on the pitch? Do you think it affected your performances?
No, I always say this. No, I mean, I think my career was quite long, and you know, achieved nearly everything I wanted to achieve. Probably very close to the World Cup. So no, it didn't. But I think it was helped me in a way to cope with the gambling, because you go training and you completely forget about gambling. You know, you come home, you worked a good session like anybody who goes for runs, and then you sit in the afternoons, which you had to.
Really interesting, because I've heard these sort of stories before. Normally it's the other way around. We all saying that football helped you negate your gambling. Most people say the gambling helped negate not being able to play football, doing this and that. But with you, it seems to have been the other way around.
Because people say, go and have if you're feeling down, go and have a good run or a good walk somewhere. Well, mine was like training. But the problem was, when I had to rest, and I had 2 games a week, you know, so in between games you've got to rest. And of course I used to sit there after training, and it was so easy to pick the phone up and have a few bets, you know, and obviously that spiraled.
When did your gambling get the worst? Was it whilst you were playing, or was it when your career finished and you were missing that buzz and missing all the involvement?
I think it obviously was a lot easier when, you know, the internet came on and you got like casino in your pocket, really. But no, I mean, it seemed a funny story now, but at the time it was probably a bit sad, really. But every Christmas I used to get a big hamper, you know, full of fantastic things from basically 3 bookmakers. One was Coral, one was William Hill, one was Ladbrokes. And I used to say to people, oh, that's very nice of them to send me a big hamper. And people used to say close to me, say, but you only send those to people that lose.
Yeah, exactly.
So although you have big wins, and this, as you probably know, you have big wins, but because of the nature of gambling, you will always go back to it.
It's that old adage, isn't it? There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Spot on, absolutely spot on. They're not in business for nothing.
Absolutely,
bookmakers.
and they do like sending us stuff when they've taken our money, so we paid an absolute fortune for them.
Exactly.
And things
Exactly.
Steph, when you first started seeing Peter back in 2012, and you still thought he was a jazz singer, did you have any idea about his gambling then? Any idea whatsoever?
It was really bizarre because when I remember we connected straight away because Pete, I say, come and found the blonde in the bar later on that night, and I remember there was a brief second when we were so engaged in talking, but I remember looking at his eyes and thinking, you look as lonely as actually I feel deep down. I could see something lonely in him. And then very early on in the relationship, I noticed suspicious behaviour. Yeah. So he used to go outside to use his phone a lot, his mobile a lot. And I started to think that maybe he had another woman. So there were very early signs.
Do you think of in that time, Pete, do you think you knew you had a problem? Or you just thought that's what you did and it's not a problem?
Yeah, because I think you get hooked on it. It's as simple as that. Yeah. You know, you kind of dismiss it. Yeah. You know, I'll have a big win next week. Yeah, you're always going to get and it's always I'll get my money back. Yeah. And it was a way of life. I looked on it. I kidded myself. I looked on it. It was a hobby that I did when I was resting in between matches. You know. And I would always got money coming in because I've learned obviously money fuels gambling. You know, if you get money coming in, that's what gives you the impetus really.
We know gambling is very much a public health problem. We know it's more than about losing money, and your mental health really suffers. But going back to the money aspect of it, how much were you gambling? Do you reckon in the height of your gambling career? And how much do you think you lost in total? A really hard question to answer.
It is because you know it's a different era. You start out. I mean, I say all in. I mean, obviously, I include owning horses in this and all the training fees and stuff like that. But I mean, it's got to be £1 million. Don't forget that.
Oh, and that £1 million, a lot of money.
Put an S on the end of that, Pete. Let's be honest.
No, I think so. You know, a lot of it. I was put in the
whatever it's what we're saying is it's money that people lose money, and people can only lose what they can get hold of. However you get hold of it.
It is.
So whatever it's a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget. I wasn't earning the sort of money these days. No, I mean, I was earning good money, but it's not anywhere near what
so it's all relative. Yeah. What did it actually look for you with your mental health? Did you ever feel suicidal? Did you ever feel really low when all this was going on?
Yeah, I think there were moments when I thought, what are you doing? You know, you've had another bad day, and I mean, I had good days, obviously, but those were fewer than the bad days, and I got to a point where I was thinking, I was on my own because I got divorced, and I was thinking, what am I doing? It's but you kind of dismiss it because you are addicted, so you put little things in your mind that says, look, no, come on, you'll win it back. Right, and but I was points I was really depressed. Yeah.
Well, how was that for you, Steph? You all of a sudden you met this big man, as you say, in the lift, and obviously by then know about his story. Then all of a sudden this hits you. How was that for you?
I didn't actually, because I had to become an investigator because Pete hid his disorder or addiction. So it took me 3.5 years to get him to the table. He was in huge denial, and I don't think he even understood, because I later learned that he'd been gambling for 45, nearly 50 years, so his entire adult life.
That's what he does.
That's what he did, and he was very much, stay out of this, Steph. This is my world. This is my comfort. This is what I do. It's private. And it was just heartbreaking. And I also had the added burden that Peter, every time I did try and broach it, he would say, well, look, you can't say things like that, because if the press get hold of it, my reputation, everything will be ruined. So I felt I literally had nowhere to go. It was a huge burden. But towards the end, his well-being was really affected, and it did start to affect me because I got exhausted.
How was it for your mental health? You must have got very low.
Towards the end, it was just that desperation and that isolation and that loneliness that I felt, and this enormity of having this fantastic, great, icon, this global icon that was walking around with such a heavy, horrible burden. And I just felt heartbroken for him as well.
So that's interesting. You really helped, and you said you had to become a bit of an investigator. Tell me a bit more about that stuff.
Yeah, it was a real game of cat and mouse for probably 2 or 3 years, which was quite exhausting. But I could see that the gambling was like a shackle around Peter mentally. So I knew I had to tread very carefully, and it was almost like there was a tower that he was behind with his gambling, so I knew I had to tap through that quite gently. So I used to use the word lose a lot and try and mentally manipulate him into understanding he was never going to win. So lose was very, very active in my language, and also,
And I suppose in his language as well, being a sportsman.
And also the other way that I did it was I started to get him to detach from the gambling disorder. So I started to say to him, Pete, you know, you have got a problem, you're not well, it's not your fault. So I didn't ever put any blame on him.
Called it an illness.
I called it an illness, rightly or wrongly, but that I could see was resonating with him. And then obviously he wanted to get married, and so I did sort of say, well, once the bookie's gone, I labelled it, I named it, and that allowed him to have those times when he could look at his actual addiction from detachment. But yeah, there was an awful lot of work that needed to be done.
And I guess a lot of work being done, because that's, you know, obviously being a problem gambler is not his fault, but it's no one else's fault. And in a way, we have to take some responsibility. The gambler has to take some responsibility. But it sounds like in this instance, you really, really helped with that process and really got involved in it.
Well, yeah, and as a loved one, you live the life. I knew the highs, I felt the lows, I felt the life of the gambling. You're on that ride, you're on that roller coaster as well, sadly.
I think one of the lucky might be the right word, but we do live in a world now where coming out and having a problem and confessing to a problem and getting help and asking for help is a lot more accepted than it used to be in the old days. There isn't that stigma, isn't like, oh, how embarrassing it is. People come out and they're encouraged to come out, and asking for support is now, people know it's a good thing. When it happened with you guys, it was just on the edge of that, wasn't it? It was like, maybe a good thing to come out, maybe not a good thing. So how did you guys deal with that?
I mean, it's been wonderful to watch, actually, because like I said to you before, Ian, I love it because we see lots of Peters coming out talking now, we see lots of Steffies coming out talking. At the time, which was sort of 5-6 years ago, that we came out and told our story, it was quite terrifying. But we were hearing a lot about young suicides, you know, because of gambling, and we just felt we needed to do it. Well, I thought it was important for Peter for several reasons. One was because he still had this huge sense of shame and embarrassment, and I said, if you go out and tell your story, you own it then. You know, no one can go tittle-tattling to the press. You know, you're in control of it, you own it, it's your story. And that got rid of all of the shame for him. And that's without the lives that he's saved. It was incredibly brave at that time, but you're quite right, we can.
But one of the questions I was going to ask was like, what made you quit? How did you decide to quit? But it sounds like it was very much a joint decision. Question maybe you've been asked before.
Yeah.
If Steph hadn't come about to encourage you, in inverted commas, to look at your gambling behaviour, to stop your gambling behaviour, do you think you would have stopped on your own?
I doubt it, actually. You know, I think it was so ingrained into me, you know, that, you know, bearing in mind, I finished with football, and in 2005 the betting rules changed and all that, so it was easier, really. But no, I don't think I would. But the first signs that I saw in myself, I mean, we used to go out, I used to come down for the weekend, you know, I was living, obviously, you know, in my own house, and coming down for Steph, and we used to go out for, a drink on Friday nights because Steph was working, and then Saturdays we'd probably go for lunch at local Chinese, and it was great. But obviously Saturday's a big racing day, isn't it? Yeah. So I think initially we got in at 12 o'clock and we had a meal, and I was like, I want to get back for the 1:15 race or something like that. And I think Steph sort of cottoned on to this, and I said, no, we'll go back and I'll watch a bit of sport and then we'll go out tonight. Yeah. I was just kidding myself. But I remember one Saturday we were having such a great time that I thought, I can't be bothered to go back, So that obviously says, I was falling in love with Steph.
It sounds like you were ready for change. One of the things you've mentioned quite a lot is how it was ingrained with you.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the Royal Ascot we use that as an excuse to not change. If it's ingrained, it's like part of our personality that we can't change it. So it makes it a little bit harder to then change. So
I think Steph worked incredibly hard, really well on that.
Yeah, and I'd promised Pete's father that I would get him to quit. It was a promise I'd made. Yeah. But there was huge amounts of work I had to do, and I knew an ultimatum was never going to work. Yeah. So to me, I took the bookie on head on. I had this third party that was intruding within this relationship, and when the iPhones took off, then Peter's gambling accelerated and his well-being began to really deteriorate.
That's such an amazing story because it's so rare. I've worked in this field for too many years to remember, and the one thing is very rare that a gambler gives up because of the pressure from somebody else. It's normally when the shit hits the fan, for lack of a better word, you get to rock bottom. Yeah. But it feels like you were really a major part of this. That's a real interesting part of this very
I used to have the
carrot dangling around Barbados and the wedding, wasn't it?
I said, she said, I proposed to her and she said, we won't be getting married. I'm not going, on a credit card or whatever. And I used to have the Racing Post every morning. And Steph would say things like, is that the losing post? So she made me, twig on to the fact that, a relationship might not always be there, But I do remember the moment, because I was getting quite fed up with the pressure of gambling, And I think Steph has made me realise, that the gambling, was having an adverse effect on me. And to cut long story short, I'd had a bad Saturday, I'd got no immediately available funds, although I was still earning a reasonable living. And I went upstairs on the Sunday and I phoned an agent and just said, look, I've done a job for you, can you pay me a bit earlier and I'll give you a good drink out of it, Yeah. And he said, of course, because he'd done it before. Yeah. And as I turned around, Steph was stood behind me and I saw her face. Oh. And I suddenly clicked and I thought, what am I doing? I've been doing this all my life and I'm not made any money out of it. It just cost me money. And I went downstairs and I just said, and I knew.
No, I slept in the spare room.
Oh, did you? I forgot that bit.
That's what done it.
Was it? No, that was the day before.
Talking about the dynamics of football, obviously at the height of your career, all throughout your career, it's all about winning, the buzzer winning.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, like most footballers, not a very good loser and not wanting to lose. What was it like then being involved, seeing football, which is win, lose or draw, all those emotions, obviously when you're losing it's a downer, and then you turn to gambling where probably 9 times out of 10 or 6 times out of 10 you were losing. What was it like living with them feelings? So you've lost at football, then you've lost at gambling, or you've won at football. And,
well, not nice, not nice, no. I mean, I could separate football, because I knew, I wanted to play on a long time, and
but
that
I'm
sort
talking
of
about
thing.
the emotions of the winning and the losing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to get, I didn't like losing. I think, but when you lose at football and then you lose at gambling as well, that's when you get really, really down, And but then I think, as touched on earlier, I think when you go training and your mind's totally off gambling, it's like a complete break. I think that helped me a lot, to eventually. But obviously, I got times when I got depressed. Yeah, definitely. Especially, when I'd finished football as well. And you could get on the laptop and you could bet, for horses to lose races or whatever. And you thought, I can do well at this. and it spiralled even more, I think.
Yeah, you're talking about the institution of Betfair when, all of a sudden people could become pretend bookmakers.
Exactly.
That's what it was,
Yeah.
And
I think that was a time it did
was the advent of
accelerate,
the online gambling,
and I'd
wasn't it?
finished with football. So of course, I was still working. I was doing jobs, promotional stuff. I still was out there doing that. But
because I'd wake up and Pete wouldn't be beside me. He'd be doing Australian
Race.
Yeah, because it then become 24/7.
Yeah, he was doing it.
And then it's the lies, the excuses, because it's all secretive on your phone. So eventually, you were aboard the CBE for your services to football, and the pair of you have done a lot of work in campaigning around gambling harms, and done some stuff on the prevention of gambling harm. Tell us a little bit about what you did with the shirt sponsorship, how you got involved with that.
Well, the CBE was basically for work in gambling harm.
Yeah.
And put football on it, And I was really honoured, really, because it was, Prince William came up, and I thought he's a big football fan, so he must have known who I was, etc. And the first thing he said to me, I believe you've done a lot of work on gambling harm, and I thought he was going to talk about football. So of course I had to change mould, and I was thinking, I said, it's getting worse out there, and there's a lot in football. But I was really pleased that he knew, about the gambling harm,
Steph, we know how much we've worked before together. We know how much work you do for what we affectionately term affected others, people affected by somebody else's gambling. Do you think there's enough support for people who are affected by loved ones gambling? And how do you think we can get the word out there to anybody listening to this that may be affected by somebody in their family's gambling, husband, wife, whoever it is, child? What do you think can be done? What do you think is being done? Is there enough?
No, definitely not. I mean, as you know, Ian, I feel so passionately and strong, and it really upsets me because I know that affected others, even though we don't like being called affected others, those of us that are affected by someone else's gambling, I always say that we are the silent victims. We're the forgotten, hidden faces. And that's how we feel. I felt shoved in the background, and you do feel neglected. And I think, there needs to be a national stance on it, because often I was Peter's antidote, and we're proof. We didn't have break even, we didn't have gam care, we only had each other, and we had to climb a mountain in Peter's recovery and to come through. And what that would have meant to me if I just could have had someone at the end of the phone or on a Teams call or a coffee with to say, I've been there, I get it. That's all I would have cherished. So for me, in the UK, we need to have something national where it's a hub where you can go to. Because don't forget also, as an affected other, you do think you're going slightly crazy because the gambler's in such huge denial often, and they're manipulative and they're hiding from you. So often, as an affected other, you're thinking, am I going crazy? Are they gambling?
You've just said something, I'm thinking out loud, that's a really important point there, because all the work the National Gambling Support Network do, which Break Even is a part of, it's normally work with people that are, the gamblers are either in treatment or they've come forward for treatment as the affected other. What we haven't looked at is being there for people that are still working to get the gambler into treatment or that haven't got any support. Yes, we get some affected others that come through to us because they know who we are, but not enough. So totally agree with you. We need some sort of campaign to make this a really special part of what recovery is, and to get this more out there, because we all need to be seen. Everybody, the National Gambling Support Network, the NHS clinics, we need to be seeing more affected others.
Most definitely. And I think having families alongside that recovery and that treatment, I think it reduces the risks of relapse. It also gives a speedier recovery, and I think if you've got the family on board, it stops family dysfunction, it settles things down, it heals. It is just a win-win for everybody.
Fantastic. Moving back to your relationship as we draw into a close, what's changed in your relationship? Obviously it was tough times at the beginning and obviously very much in love. Where is it now? Has your relationship changed, you think, since them days when you were a gambler? You were a
I
singer?
think so, and I think it's because I'm very open.
Yep.
You know, I'm obviously far more relaxed.
Yep.
You know, I'm far more ease with myself, but I'm very open. You know, obviously Steph, you know, can look at my accounts.
Yep.
You know, she can look at anything to do with me personally. I'm very open about that. She could just put the phone on and look, see, you know, anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the most important thing, trust. You know, she knows that, you know, she knows me, and she knows that I wouldn't ever, you know, gamble or waste money in that respect. And I think that's important.
I do think, though, we are closer than perhaps the average couple because we went on such a journey together.
Yeah.
And it was such a difficult journey. And when we wrote our book, Pete wrote his story and I wrote mine, and we'd never really talked about it. And when and you read my story and you were like, did I really do all that to you? Was that what it was like? And then when I read Peter's, I was like, oh my God, it was worse than I thought it was for you. And I just remember saying to you, we're an amazing couple.
Yeah.
And and sometimes it's really hard to accept what was. It's a little bit like that was then, this is now.
Yeah.
And then you read back on it, it's like, wow, was that really me? Or did I really do all that?
I think the gambler has got to do it. You know, as much help as you can get is fantastic. You know, the ultimate thing is the gambler's got to want to do it. You know, and it's got to realise that you're not going to win. Yeah. You know, whether you take drink or whether you take drugs, that's just a stimulant, and eventually that will have an effect on your body. A gambler, you know, very, very few minor percentage will.
And even
will
the ones that
end up
do, they give it back at some stage. So.
Exactly, and you know you've got to realise that you know it's not something you're ever going to win at, and all it's going to do is cost you a lot of harm in yourself, a lot of depression, and you're just going to give all the money away instead of using it on proper things.
As we said, it's not only your money you might give away, your mental health be given away. We know how much suicidal ideation is involved in it.
Yeah.
So to finish up with, it's been really interesting talking to you guys. Let's start with Peter. What would you say to anyone listening to this who may be struggling with their own gambling? What's your message?
You can stop. You know, I mean, the reason I came out is because we knew that people were committing suicide, young people, you know, and it is a very toxic, you know, addictive product, gambling, you know, whatever it is. And get some help, get the right help. There's people out there that can talk to you, and, you know, most gamblers will have problems, you know, financial or emotional, whatever. Get help, but realise, you know, that you can overcome it. And that's why I came out, actually, because of the suicides. Right. You can overcome it. If you've got the will and the aptitude, you know, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I would just say, please, just make sure you get help, because it is a terrible addiction. And
the disease and whatever we want to call it. So the message is, don't suffer in silence, get some help and support.
Exactly,
Brilliant, Peter.
Yeah.
And Steph, to finish up with, what about those struggling with their loved ones gambling? What's your message to them?
Oh, just reach out. You know, Peter will tell you 24/7. My number is a public number. It has been since we came out 5-6 years ago. We've not turned anyone away, have we? We've had alcoholics and loved ones that's come to us. You know, this is our legacy. I'm never going to stop banging the drum, because it's so important. So reach out. You know, there's so many organisations now that are opening their arms up to loved ones. But also, if you've got that gut feeling that someone you're close to has got a gambling disorder or addiction or problem, you're probably right.
Well, hopefully one day you can be an ambassador for the people that are affected by other people's gambling, and people can listen to you.
Yeah, I mean, I wish, you know, my mum and dad, I'm sure they worried very much about me. They never said anything. They were just there, you know, to help me, you know, and were always supportive. But, you know, I think people away from the gambler get affected.
Absolutely.
Very much so, and they need help as well.
also the great thing to from my point to end it on, Ian, was 6 weeks after Peter quit gambling, his father was passing away.
Wow.
And I managed to have the opportunity to hold his hand and say he's done it.
Fantastic. What a lovely end.
That was a great moment.
And once again, Peter, Steph, thanks very much for being on the Break Even podcast.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Well done with what you're doing.
If you or someone you know is affected by gambling related harm, please call us on 01273 833 722 or visit our website www.breakeven.org.uk. Alternatively, please call the National Gambling Helpline on 0808 8020 133. Please ensure to like and subscribe to all our social media channels and keep this message out there. Thank you.